faith. And that's a quote that I'll forever remember in my lifetime. So we're looking at quotes of Jesus. First off, go with me to James chapter 3. James chapter 3. And it's something that was read earlier by Trenton, but I want to read it again. James chapter 3, verses 3 through 5. And it says, "If we put bits into the mouths of horses so that they obey us, we guide their whole bodies as well. Look at the ships also. Though they are also large and are driven by strong winds, they are guided by a very small rudder, wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire." So in the study of Jesus' quotes, we have to remember that Jesus is the most powerful force that has ever walked on the face of the earth. And he will always be the most powerful being that has ever walked amongst men. So talking about his words, talking about what he has said, if his mouth is his rudder, it's what steers him, it is the most powerful thing that has ever walked on the face of the earth. And that's something that we have to realize in this study, that there will never be anything more powerful. I think of Hurricane Katrina and how it literally took out parts of states. And I think of the atomic bombs that were dropped in World War II and how it devastated cities. And I think of those things and how powerful they are, and how all of those things together and all of the most powerful things you can think of combined together will not match Jesus' words, will not match what he has said. So starting off, we're going to go to Matthew chapter 8. Matthew chapter 8. And in this study, we are searching for, in my mind, the most powerful quote, or the most powerful thing that Jesus said. Matthew chapter 8. And we're going to look at verses 14 through 17. Matthew chapter 8, verses 14 through 17. And it says, "And when Jesus entered Peter's house, he saw his mother-in-law lying sick with a fever. He touched her hand, and the fever left her. And she rose and began to serve him. That evening they brought to him many who were oppressed by demons, and he cast out the spirits with, listen to this, with a word, and he healed all who were sick. This was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah. He took our illnesses and bore our diseases." If you look there in verse 16, it said that he cast out spirits and healed with the word. So we read this several spots in the Bible where Jesus would say, "Rise up and walk," or Jesus would say, "Demons, be gone," and he threw them into the pigs or threw them out into different places. And as I was looking over this, I kind of forgot how used to, or how accustomed to, the fact that Jesus healed people. I read over that and it's like, yeah, Jesus healed people. And it's because I've read it 1,000 times. But Jesus literally took diseases away. I think of David Slater and how he's sick and how he goes to doctors and they're trying their best to heal him. And if Jesus were here, he could literally go and it'd be gone. I think of my grandmother who's losing her memory, and Jesus could go and it'd be right back to normal. So we have to remember that Jesus' this quote of him healing people is very powerful. But I don't think it's the most powerful thing. Let's go to Mark chapter 4. Let's go to Mark chapter 4. Look at verses 37 through 41. Mark chapter 4, 37 through 41. And it says, "And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, 'Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?' And he awoke and rebuked the wind and sea and said to the sea, 'Peace, be still.' And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And he said to them, 'Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?' And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, 'Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?'" So here we see Jesus saying to the sea, "Quit it, be still." And literally the sea stopped. And this is another thing that I've read over hundreds of times, and I've got to the point where it's like, yeah, Jesus calmed the sea. But I think of, like I said, Hurricane Katrina and how it wiped out parts of states and whole cities, and how Jesus could have just said, "Stop." And just like that, it would have been over with. And he could do that with anything. He could do that with earthquakes or tornadoes or whatever. But I also don't think that this is the most impactful quote that Jesus said. So let's go to Luke. Luke chapter 7. Luke chapter 7. Luke chapter 7, we're going to look at verses 44 through 50. Luke 7, 44 through 50. And it says, "Then turning toward the woman, he said to Simon, 'Do you see this woman? I entered your house, and you gave me no water for my feet, but she has wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but from the time I came in, she has not ceased to kiss my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with ointment. Therefore I tell you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven. For she loved much, but he who is forgiven little loves little.' And he said to her, 'Your sins are forgiven.' Then those who were at the table with him began to say among themselves, 'Who is this who even forgives sins?' And he said to the woman, 'Your faith has saved you. Go in peace.'" With Jesus' words, he was able to do something that no one else will ever be able to do, is that he actually forgave sins and that he made her whole. She was broken, and she was literally crying and in pieces at her feet. But with his words, he forgave her sins. But I don't think this is the most impactful quote Jesus has had. For the most impactful quote that I think Jesus had, we have to go to Mark chapter 15. Mark chapter 15. Mark chapter 15. And we're going to look at verses 26 through 32. Mark chapter 15, verses 26 through 32. And it says, "And the inscription of the charge against him read, 'The King of the Jews.' And with him they crucified two robbers, one on his right and one on his left. And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, 'Aha, you who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself, and come down from the cross.' So also the chief priests with the scribes mocked him to one another, saying, 'He saved others, he cannot save himself. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross that we might see and believe. And those who were crucified with him also reviled him. I don't know if you caught it or not, but if you have a red letter Bible, there's no red letters. Jesus isn't quoting anything here. So I have to say the most impactful thing that Jesus ever said was nothing. Isaiah 53 and verse 7 says, "He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep before its shears is silent, so he opened not his mouth." I talked earlier about how Jesus' words were the most powerful thing that has ever came upon us. And here, these people were egging him on to say something. They're egging him on to come down from the cross. And it wasn't the fact that Jesus couldn't. I mean, we know that he could have sent 10,000 angels, and just like that, everything would have been over. And he had every right. He had every right to say something. He had every right to say, okay, and then come on down off of the cross. But he didn't. He stayed silent. So, I asked the question, relating this back to us and to our tongues. With our tongues, with Morgan and I have every power to drop an atomic bomb in our relationship with the words that I say. I can bring a storm that will ruin our relationship with the words that I say. And there are times when I might have the right to. And there might be times where I do something wrong and she has the right to say something and to, damage our relationship. But she chooses not to. And I choose not to because I love her and she loves me. And same thing with Jesus. He had every right to come off down the cross and say, okay, I am the Son of God. Now see it. But he chose not to. He chose not to say anything. So thinking of our tongues and how we use our words and all that, I tend to find myself trying to get a memorable quote, or I try to find myself saying something that is profound or something that will be remembered. And sometimes the best thing is not to say anything at all. So my challenge for us today is when we have the right to say something, to drop a bomb in one of our relationships, when we have the right to bring a storm, that we don't, that we stay silent, and that we love the people around us just like Jesus loved us when he was silent upon the cross. So church, if there's anything we can do for you, please come as we stand and as we sing.